Hello and welcome to 360. I'm Daniel Pizarro. In 2012, the Country Liberal Party emerged from being in opposition for over a decade to win the Northern Territory general election. Leader Terry Mills offered stability, economic strategy, and a bright future for Territorians. But within months, Terry Mills would be gone, and the CLP would stumble from one crisis to another, including leadership spills galore, ministerial reshuffles, defections, and scandal. Tonight, I speak to key people who witnessed the destruction of a one-term government, including Terry Mills.
I use the words new era, and I really believed in a new era, and that new era was really connecting people and getting people to buy into a narrative so that we're all in similar spaces, recognise it's not really politics that solves problems, it's people working together that solve problems. I was fully aware that there were forces all around me that didn't really share that narrative.
Twinset and Pearls Brigade that you find in every Conservative party, I think they're a bit outraged because Terry is a person of moral standing, a very proper person, and I think that was the beginning, if you like, of the CLP's problems, and I don't think they recovered from that.
At that stage, Terry Mills was trying to get the Territory's budget under control and was hurting Territorians' budget. In that fight, Territorians are always going to win out.
There was no coup, there was no night of the long knives, there was no plan for this process.
During this week and today, Territorians voted for change and they voted for a better future.
In many ways, Labor hadn't really done too many things wrong. It was a government that had been in for a long time. Paul Henderson had replaced Claire Martin, and there was a bit of an it's time feel to it, maybe even a bit of staleness in the Henderson government, and that really was a factor that I don't think anyone was expecting. What really surprised us was that the swing came in the bush. There are a lot of bush seats that went to the CLP for the first time in some time, and that's where the swing came. Usually in the Territory, you target those northern suburb seats. They didn't really move too much, and that was one of the biggest surprises out of that 2012 election. It left Terry Mills with a mandate, it left him with a parliamentary majority, but it also left him with a lot of young and in many ways first-time MPs, and I think that came back in the subsequent years to hurt him.
Terry Mills has led the Country Liberal Party to a landslide victory, with over 50% of the primary vote alone and 16 out of the 25 seats in the Northern Territory general election. The Territory had seen several years of unstable Labor minority government. Indigenous voters in remote electorates felt neglected by Labor and helped the CLP into office on promises of better living standards, jobs, and an ending to reckless spending by the previous government. The Country Liberals were riding on a wave of change.
I think that was a big message to the country, is that Aboriginal people can't be taken for granted. They need to be brought into the whole enterprise of government in a respectful way, which means that there has to be some cultural change on our part of how we think about politics. And so the formula was tired and overused by Labor. We provided a fresh opportunity and a meaningful point of engagement because we actually talked about things that mattered. I actually believed in certain things that were probably a little awkward for the party but were useful politically, sadly. That was bilingual education, which means respecting the languages that are spoken, respecting the language, respecting the culture and the stories that have come before, making an effort to understand those things so you can actually bring the people in and then you can start working with them. So I just knew that at the centre of it there needed to be a genuine respect, and that's around language and culture as the starting point.
An astonishment to everyone, and the real reason was the switch in the Aboriginal vote. Since self-government in 1978, Aborigines had voted state and federal for the Labor Party, and so that was sort of a given. The nostrums were that the elections were won in the northern suburbs of Darwin, and then what happened was that suddenly 5 Aboriginal seats fell to the CLP, and that was for a combination of reasons: the federal intervention and Labor's continuation of it under Rudd, and the previous Labor government's forced amalgamation of all the community governments into these large shires.
But almost immediately, cracks in the new government appeared. CLP Deputy Leader Kezia Purik was more or less assumed to take the Deputy Chief Ministership, but the caucus voted to replace her as Deputy Leader and in effect Deputy Chief Minister with Robin Lambley.
I was limited in my capacity to speak plainly. Those around me knew what was going on. That the Speaker, the Deputy Leader, was not providing me with any support. In fact, quite the opposite. And so I was left in a very difficult position. I actually needed a deputy who was going to genuinely support me. And I kept Kezia as the deputy as an effort to show goodwill and to try to unite parties. And still that was used, sadly, to advance the objectives of others. But at the end, when it came down to it, I really, finally needed a deputy who would actually support me. And yet, of course, everybody knew what was really going on, were asking me the embarrassing questions, and I had to be a statesman and not I couldn't handle it publicly. I just had to continue on because all those who were asking the question knew what was behind it.
Despite the unusual start, the Country Liberal soon settled into governing, and Terry Mills claimed after 100 days that the majority of his party's pledges on tougher crime laws, more police, and a review of the Territory's finances were filled. But underneath, tensions were mounting and were to explode in 2013.
When they got in, they followed, I suppose, the rule book established by Neville Wran back in 1976 when, oh my gosh, there's a black hole in the budget. We've got to do strong measures. So they upped electricity prices by 20%. And that created a backlash in the community. And then the more muscular element, shall we call them, you can call them bogans if you like, within the party decided to knock off Mills to try and recover their position. And so that was, at the time, it was one of those things in politics, as Gareth Evans once said, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And it turned out not to be such a good idea because the sort of conservative elements that have always been there in the Labor Party, I'm talking about the sort of Twinsett and Pearls brigade that you find in every Conservative party, I think they were a bit outraged because Terry is a person of moral standing, a very proper person, and I think that was the beginning, if you like, of the CLP's problems, and I don't think they recovered from that.
That lacked discipline in many ways was a government that wasn't used to governing, and maybe that was the problem all along. These were MPs that hadn't been on government benches before, and that showed.
Paul Henderson resigned from Parliament in January 2013, triggering a by-election on February 16th. Voters turned on the CLP, with a 12.4% swing against them due to public service cuts and more government charges. Just 2 days after the by-election, Country Liberal MPs canvassed a possible challenge from Attorney General John Elferich. It lacked support and the challenge fell apart, but the Chief Minister refused Elferich's resignation.
Because I knew he'd been used. And if we didn't have the capacity to sort out our shit internally, and if I started to create further problems by demanding the resignation of somebody, we would end up with, going from bad to very, very bad. In fact, there was an occasion where I was in cabinet by one of the cabinet members, and some of the supporters who were probably more mild-mannered suggested that I should go to the police and report it. Now, I thought, if we can't sort this out internally, what hope have we got of governing the territory? And then later on, that person became the Deputy Chief Minister. I wasn't in the cabinet any longer, and I inquired of those characters, said, how did that happen? Did he actually get support? So that shows the strength of capacity for these people to stand up for what was right, allowed him to become the Deputy Chief Minister. But they all saw what had happened in the cabinet, and then asked if I would go and make a police complaint.
Was that David Tolner? When he threw cabinet and swore at you and all that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Certainly not becoming of a parliamentarian usually.
No, it's not, and I thought, you go and do this, go to the police. And I thought, well, how's that going to look for the territory, if we're going to have to call the police in on the cabinet?
In early March, Robin Lamley quit as Deputy Chief Minister, but remained as Treasurer, and events began to snowball. Primary Industries Minister Willem Westra van Halter became Deputy Chief Minister in the 4th Mills Ministry. It lasted 6 days.
Tolner, Giles and Elferink, who was the Attorney General, they all came in after the election with aspirations to leadership. And I think Mills assumed that the three of them would cancel each other out. And the problem was that apparently Tolner and Giles did a deal where Tolner agreed that Giles would be the leader. And so that was the sort of, if you like, the fatal alliance that knocked Mills off.
On Wednesday, March 13, 2013, Terry Mills was on a trade mission in Japan when he heard his Transport Minister Adam Giles had formally challenged him for control of the government. Just days before, Giles publicly backed his boss. Now the knives were out.
I had my mobile phone in my pocket and it was buzzing, getting a lot of phone calls. I then had to take a break, and I heard the message that the numbers were being counted, and I thought, wow, that's a big call. And so I finished the meeting without telling anybody what was going on. And once the meeting was concluded, and I thanked them, the hosts, for their briefing, and it's all done respectfully. It had an excellent time in Tokyo and in Yokohama as guests of INPEX. But as soon as that was finished, I then got on the phone, and I was told by some of my supporters that it was definitely on. I could see the play quite clearly. I was astonished that they had the audacity to do such a thing. Some of my supporters suggested, when I wanted to test whether it was actually true or not, I was told, yes, it is true. There was a list of names on a piece of paper. Now, I could have gone and done what my then predecessor went on to do and say, well, I'm not going anywhere. And I thought, well, if that's the case, and if they're able to take power on that basis, and some of my colleagues were just weary after 4 years of battling this, they suggested it would be best to let it go. And so, in the interests of the organisation and the body politic, I then came back to accept that outcome, and I chose then to not do what Kevin Rudd did or Julia Gillard did, and was quiet. In some ways, I sort of felt, well, that's clearly the end. It's in a far more dramatic way than I expected. But I thought, now over to you. And I said, I'd much prefer to be in my position, having innocent blood shed, than to be in your position. And how's this going to play out? So it took me a while just to sit back, recover, and watch how things unfold.
I think the majority of Territorians thought it was rather surprising, given that he just led the party to election. So, that's what I said. That was the point at which the CLP began to enter a sea of troubles.
That's putting it mildly.
Well, the commentators like me, you see, they're a very entertaining government, and if you like, in the journalistic terms, they made easy copies.
We knew that the Mills government was unpopular. A lot of it had to do with the big increase in electricity prices, and that was going against that cost of living. At that stage, Terry Mills was trying to get the Territory budget under control and was hurting Territorians' budget. In that fight, Territorians are always going to win out. The fact how it all went down, being in Japan, being away, the way the party moved against him surprised me, and the people that moved in that party surprised me. This was a lot of the first-term MPs that had been elected largely on the back of Terry Mills' popularity that so quickly moved against him.
He had lost 11 votes to 5. The Mills government had lasted just over 6 months. Adam Giles was now Australia's first Indigenous head of government, and David Tollner became his deputy. Giles said the CLP had become a joke, and Mills' style of governance wasn't resonating with voters.
There was no coup, there was no night of the long knives, there was no plan for this process. This was something where people came to me yesterday morning and asked if I would do the job. It is a fact that for a number of years I have been agitating for a change in the way we did our business in the Country Liberals. I've always thought that we needed to have a different approach to our business, and last week when I was asked to fulfil the role of Deputy Leader, I didn't take that role because I did not believe that taking that position would have adjusted ourselves to the right point.
Terry Mills returned to the backbenches, a constant reminder of the dark nature of politics. If the coup against Terry Mills was supposed to fix the party infighting, it became clear that the split in the party wasn't fixed. 3 of the Indigenous MPs elected in the 2012 election with the CLP, including Alison Anderson, swung back and forth from slamming Giles to supporting him. On February 20th, Terry Mills quit the Legislative Assembly, saying it was time to go.
My dominant question was where could I best add value? And by sitting in the Parliament, if I became truly active, I'd become a distraction and a sideshow. So I concluded that it would be unproductive for me to remain in the Parliament because I'd be a distraction, either the Labor Party using me to attack the government, or if I started to attack the government, then I'd be attacked, because a lot of them were extremely guilty as to how they'd come to power, and I knew that it was going to get quite bad. And in the interests of preserving politics as best I could, I provided no background commentary. I didn't go and run information to the media. I just quietly left after concluding that where I could best add value is in the re-emerging bilateral interests between Australia and Indonesia, which was my primary interest in going to the Territory in the first place.
As a face-saving measure, Adam Giles appointed Terry Mills as the Northern Territory Commissioner to Indonesia and the ASEAN nations. Then, on April 5th, 3 Indigenous MPs from the CLP, Alison Anderson, Larissa Lee and Francis Xavier, quit the party after their demands to change the cabinet were rebuffed. The CLP now had to hold on to Mills' seat of Blaine to maintain their majority, which they did by a narrow margin, and Francis Xavier returned to the government in September, but the drama wasn't over. Storm clouds gathered over Darwin's Legislative Assembly on the night of February 2nd, 2015. Journalists were notified of a press conference by Willem Westra van Halter. He was flanked by John Elfrich. Westra van Halter stunned the gathered press by announcing he had rolled Adam Giles in a leadership challenge 9 votes to 5.
Discontent, I suppose, with the direction of government has been around for some time amongst a number of my colleagues.
Promising better consultation with the people and a change in Giles' authoritarian leadership style. Several scandals involving the police had also dogged the government, weakening the leadership. From afar, Terry Mills, who was in Jakarta, heard the events, but his apparent reaction wasn't what was made out to be.
Anyway, surprisingly, the move was made. So I was on the record that I actually did suggest, I think you're probably best to leave it be. But they did make the move. Willem made that move, and there was all of a sudden this flurry of activity. I was then receiving phone calls in Jakarta saying, can you see what's going on? And I thought, actually I can, and I was actually just an observer. and then some smart journalist in the NT News has that little meme of me smiling. I looked at it. My mother had just phoned me and said, "Terry, you hear what's going on in Darwin?" I thought, "Yeah, actually I have, Mum. This tweet just came through," and I thought, I must send that to Mum. So I touched it. I touched it thinking I'd hardly ever used Twitter, and I touched it to see if I can copy it and then forward it to my mother, which caused it then to be retweeted. And I thought, oh, well, I probably shouldn't have done that, but I wasn't intending to retweet it. I was actually standing back watching this. And of course, all hell broke loose and gave them the opportunity to say, cut his head off too. So I thought, oh, well, little did he know, I'd already been speaking to my lawyer about getting out of this contract. But no, that was the truth. I was called to give an account, and I thought, honestly, it was a mistake, but whatever. It's certainly not a hanging offence. A retweet.
The following morning, Westra Van Holter's swearing-in ceremony was delayed, as Adam Giles refused to stand down, plunging the government into crisis. The defiant leader claimed he still had the Assembly's support and threatened either a vote of confidence or a snap election.
This actually is interesting, and it has a precedent in Australian politics. In 1987, the National Party room in Queensland voted to replace Joe Bjelke-Petersen as leader with Mike Ahern. And Bjelke went to the governor and asked him to recall Parliament. And Bjelke's strategy was then to go into the Parliament and, instead of announcing his resignation, call for a vote of confidence in the government and thereby force all the National Party MPs to vote for him, effectively. And so Giles employed exactly that. When the party decided to dump Giles employed exactly the same technique. He wasn't going to go. But the interesting thing about Giles was that he knew his colleagues very well, because he, in effect, said, if you knock me off, I'll call an election. And of course, at that stage, they were unpopular and the backbenchers didn't want an election. So you have one of the most extraordinary incidents in Australian politics occurs where the party votes to remove its leader and the leader says, "Pooh bum, I'm not going."
Publicly. The fact that he came out and said, "Yep, we've got it," and then had to renege on it so quickly. There was a number of moments where you said, well, this summarises the CLP perfectly. I think that 24 hours did, from the coup itself, the late night meeting, the announcement that he was Chief Minister designate, to then getting to the stage where Adam Giles simply said no, he wouldn't do it. No, he wouldn't go, and he knew he had the numbers and was prepared to bring down the government itself if he didn't get his way. And then we had Willem Westra Van Holter as all of a sudden deputy. The number of deputies that the CLP had was remarkable, let alone the number of leaders, the number of changes of that top two on the ticket. You want to know where the discipline struggles come from. There was no consistency of message because there was no consistency of leaders in the government, and that's what made it so hard for them to govern. So that was a bizarre period.
After a marathon party meeting, Adam Giles remained as Chief Minister, with Willem Westra Van Holter taking over as deputy from Peter Chandler, who would replace David Toner in September 2014 after he made gay slurs. The two looked uncomfortable in front of the bemused media. Then Giles took his revenge against Terry Mills by sacking him as Commissioner 2 weeks after the failed coup. As 2015 continued, the CLP lurched from crisis to crisis.
Never would I have thought in my wildest dreams that I would be forced to resign from a party I have been philosophically aligned with all my life. Never would I have thought I would be subjected to the persecution, retribution and intimidation dished out by the Chief Minister and the Treasurer.
Comes from a family that has a long tradition of independence of thought. Her mother was a CLP Member of Parliament back in the 1980s, and she actually left the CLP and successfully ran as an independent against them. So, and Lamley was put off for the same reason, well, for one of the same reasons as Alison Anderson was put off was by the rampant sexism of the Bogan triumvirate that was running the party.
It surprised me that this thing had been allowed to go on for so long, and all of a sudden people find their voice for whatever reason. Some of it's self-interest, rats abandoning a sinking ship. Well, they'd been involved in the operations of that ship, some of them. So there was a mixture of motives there. But what has surprised me is the culture of the party had been allowed to had allowed this to exist for such a long time, and there wasn't any sort of open stance by the party to bring this under control.
In February 2016, Willem Wester van Halter quit as Deputy Chief Minister. After it emerged, he had a personal and financial interest in a Vietnamese company that wanted to develop a major fruit orchard in the territory. Terry Mills' successor, Nathan Barrett, quit after a sex scandal. And finally, the Don Dale Detention Centre abuse scandal, showing teenage boys being forcibly strip-searched, injured and some shackled, embarrassed the government further, but the reaction in the territory was slightly different.
Most Territorians would have already made up their minds, and I think most Territorians feel very differently about Don Dale than the rest of the country do. This was an issue that in many ways highlighted some of the plights of Indigenous communities in the Territory that a lot of Territorians already knew about. This was their daily life. You go back through news articles of the Territory and you'll see worse than what happened in Don Dale, and you'll see a much smaller response. The Don Dale issue, in my opinion, didn't affect the vote largely for the 2016 election. Territorians have made up their mind. And if anything, it showed Adam Giles as a leader. He again galvanised behind. Territorians were in many ways embarrassed by Don Dale, but they also, in many ways, have seen the splurge of particularly youth crime. You see Don Dale and you're upset and you're ashamed, but you also see your neighbour's property getting broken into and you want crime cracked down on. People drew the line between those two, possibly unfairly, but they drew the line between those two quite regularly. And Adam Giles being tough on crime and going the law and order route wouldn't have lost him any votes in the Territory. If anything, it probably gained him some.
On August 6, 2016, Terry Mills announced he had quit the CLP and would recontest his old seat of Blaine as an independent. In a letter sent to the party, which few people have seen, the former Chief Minister spells out in detail why he was going alone.
I did give it deep thought. Then I found people were asking me who weren't political. They were community people who'd valued the type of contribution I'd made. I weighed that up, and it was only fairly, probably 5-6 weeks before the election that I decided to come back, and I decided to come back as an independent. I heard that the CLP some of them had suggested that maybe should ask Terry to come back because of the terrible scandal in Blaine. Maybe he should come back, and I thought the audacity of them to even think that they would ask me to come back again. So with that in mind, I thought, no, I have to come back as an independent because my objective is to try to reinvigorate the community and bring back some confidence in the political processes. So in spite of all that I'd suffered, I felt that my work was incomplete. My wife supported me in that. We've come back to serve our community.
As the election campaign got underway, the CLP offered promises of fiscal responsibility, retirement bonuses, and a revamp of Darwin's CBD. The party was under enormous pressure. The federal election, held in July, saw the CLP reduced to just one senator, Nigel Scullion, and another opinion poll showed the CLP primary vote on just 26%. Ex-CLP MPs Kezia Purik and Robin Lambley were also recontesting their seats, siphoning off crucial votes for the CLP. On August 27, 2016, 100,000 Territorians cast their vote for the Legislative Assembly. As the results came in, it was clear voters had punished the Country Liberals after 4 chaotic years. Less than an hour after voting closed, the Labor Party under Michael Gunner was declared the winner.
The two at the other end, though, they both go according to our preparations. So, Jono, lots of red taking over lots of blue there. That points towards Michael Gunner being Chief Minister by the end of the night.
It certainly does, Charles. No doubt there is a massive trend emerging at the moment.
Labor swept to victory with 18 seats. The Country Liberals were reduced to just 2, the worst defeat of a governing party in Australian history.
It is extraordinary. Territorians have spoken. They have rejected the chaos of the last 4 years and they have chosen to place their trust in Labor.
Oh, look, I feel for the party. I feel for many of our candidates and members of Parliament who lost their seat. Very good people trying to do the right thing by the party and particularly by the Territory and their constituents. I think undoubtedly the personality of politics, or the politics of personality, is the thing that has caused much of the pain to Territorians, and it doesn't matter how well you manage the economy or you fix law and order or reduce cost of living. What looks ugly in the media and what looks ugly coming from too many personality issues and what we sort of call division in politics, I think causes much of the problem, and that's as a result. That's what we're wearing today.
Adam Giles and Willem Wester van Holder, holding on to some of the safest CLP seats, were thrown out of office, while former CLP members Kezia Perrick and Robin Lambley were elected as independents alongside Jerry Wood. And after days of vote counting, Terry Mills retook the seat of Blaine by 100 votes.
Yeah, I mean, we all knew the government was on the nose. As I said, there was a feeling around Darwin, at least, that maybe it wouldn't be as bad. Maybe a hung parliament was in play. There might have been some polling that had suggested that whilst the CLP was on the nose, that Michael Gunner hadn't done quite enough to prosecute the case. The CLP still garnered 32% of the vote across the Territory, so there is still elements, there's still sparks there for the CLP. It certainly wasn't a complete wipeout territory-wide. It was a wipeout almost in the parliament, though, and that's where it becomes so hard to keep that brand alive. There's a lot of hard work has to be done over the next 4 years for those in the CLP if they want the brand to survive. I was amazingly shocked by that final result.
Not a surprise. I thought it was well-deserved, that kind of punishment, because the purpose of politics is to advance the best interests of Territorians, not to self-serve. They lost the plot a long time ago. I did the best I could, and I was up against it. And in some ways, the fact that all this horrible business was being conducted publicly, and the fact too that it was also extremely bad look nationally and internationally, and I'm seeing this from an international perspective, it was looking very bad in circles through Indonesia and ASEAN and the rest of the world. Certainly Japan were watching it. And I think the community had their opportunity to make their voice known on the 27th of August, and they came out and they spoke, and it's completely understood. I predicted 2 seats, thought possible even less, but I thought that was an outcome that allowed us then to reset and to start again.
For the former leader, retaking his seat was a chance to fix politics in the Northern Territory, as well as keeping an eye on the new Labor government. Gary Higgins became the new CLP leader, a party of just 2 MPs. Can the CLP actually be an effective opposition?
No, is the short answer to that. But there will be effective opposition to the government, because the independents collectively are more talented than either side of politics. You've got Mills, you've got Purick, you've got Jerry Wood, who's a long-term independent, Robin Lambley, ex-minister, ex-deputy chief minister, ex-treasurer. There's a very strong independent group in Parliament, and I think they will hold the government to account.
The future of the Country Liberal Party remains to be seen. The new Chief Minister, Michael Gunner, pledged to fully resource the CLP as the official opposition. But for Terry Mills, his time with the party he had been a member for 15 years has come and gone. Now he's looking to the future.
A number of them have come to me and said, look, we're pretty upset with the CLP and how it's gone and so on. Have you ever thought of coming and helping form a new party or something like that? And I think, I scold them because how quickly they abandon their position and then not talk about or reflect on the involvement they had in allowing this to occur. They reduce the problem to a couple of people like Adam Giles or Dave Toll and say they caused the problem. Well, that problem didn't exist all by itself in a vacuum. There was an enormous culture that allowed that to exist. So my advice to anyone that comes anywhere near me suggesting that they might want to have a conversation with me about what comes next, I tell them to nick off, have some serious soul searching, ask the question, how did this happen? What role did you play in it? And think deeply about it. And maybe you can come back and have a conversation with me in 6 months' time to tell me how you're going. But as for me, I have given more than most. My energy is now reserved for a different project, and that is to help lift the reputation of the Northern Territory and reconnect people to the process. Others can rebuild the party or whatever comes next. My job is to bring people together.
Terry Mills there. Adam Giles and Willem Westervan Holter were approached to participate in tonight's episode, but they didn't respond. That's 360. I'm Daniel Pizarro. Thank you so much for your company. Until next time, good night.